Preaching to the choir. It can be a blessing when you are preaching to the proverbial choir, so to speak. Now we understand that we don't use a choir because we're all the choir, singing one to another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. But we're not talking about choirs this afternoon anyway. We're talking about evangelism. We're talking about soul winning. Proverbs 11:30. The wise man said, "The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and he that winneth souls is wise." He that winneth souls is wise. That's a deep statement, especially when we stop to think about just what is meant by winneth souls. If we leave Proverbs for just a moment, fast forward to the New Testament, and we think about Christ's approach, not only in his interaction with those that he was reaching, but the way that he prepared his apostles. Jesus first called his soul winners. If you think about Mark 3, verse 14, he called to him the 12 that they might go out and preach. By the time we get to Mark 6, 7, Jesus is sending the 12 out 2 by 2 in pairs. He called his soul winners. He coupled his soul winners together, sent them out in pairs. By the way, he not only did that with the apostles, but Luke 10:1, he did that with the 70 that he sent to preach his word. He called, he coupled. Oh, he most certainly counseled. He gave them advice for how they were to approach their work. Think about the words of Matthew 10:16. When he said, "Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves." Matthew 10 is what we call the limited commission. He's sending the apostles out. And he told them, just before he started talking about their persecution and their hardships, you be wise as serpents. He's not only talking about their approach to the difficulties, he's talking about their approach to winning souls in the first place. Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Yes, Jesus exhorted wisdom in reaching others. What wisdom did he mean? What kind of wisdom are we to apply in this trying to reach souls? Well, Solomon said, "He that winneth souls is wise." In the early 1900s, there was an individual named Dale Carnegie who spent years conducting classes on self-help and improvement. And people came to him asking about a class that would involve influencing other people, how to deal with people. He started looking for a textbook and a series of material to use for such a class. And Mr. Carnegie's assessment was there was no book in existence that would meet the needs of what these adults wanted to study. And as they examined and surveyed, they found more and more that was the number one topic that adults wanted to study. They wanted to know about their bodies while they kept getting sick year after year, more and more with each as age came along. Matter of fact, from my conversations today, I think that still is around. But then we want to know how to deal with people. Mr. Carnegie began putting together the material for himself. And the book that was produced was called, you're probably familiar with it at this point, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Now, over the course of the last 85 years, that book has been something of the first flake of a snowball. You now are familiar with names like Zig Ziglar or terms like Amway and all of the pyramid schemes that have grown out of the principles that Mr. Carnegie put together. But what Mr. Carnegie presented was not intended simply to be a salesman's guide to getting someone to buy a used Volvo. What Mr. Carnegie put together was intended to be a book on dealing with people. There is a statement that Mr. Carnegie made with which we must disagree. Because he made the statement, there was no book in existence that met the need. He wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People. But if we think about another book that was already well in existence, because Solomon had penned the greatest contents of it long before Mr. Carnegie wrote his book in the early 1900s, it'd be the book of Proverbs. Now, Mr. Carnegie's book initially had three primary sections. Those sections were the fundamental techniques in handling people, 6 ways to make people like you, and how to win people to your way of thinking. We're not here to study Dale Carnegie, but we are here to see what God's Word says about how to influence people. And I submit to you that there is no greater guide, no greater practical approach to influencing souls and impacting souls than listening to what Solomon said about the nuts and bolts, ins and outs of dealing with people, and then apply that to carrying the gospel. So our study today is not going to be how to win friends and influence people, but we will look at how to win souls and influence hearts. And we will actually follow along with the structure that Mr. Carnegie put together, but we're going to let Mr. Solomon do the real teaching as we look at fundamental techniques in handling souls. Because we're not just talking about people. We're not just talking about extras in the epic film that is my life. No, we are talking about souls, each of which is worth more than the world. What doth it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? What would a man give in exchange for a soul? By the way, Matthew 16:26, Jesus did not say, what would you take to give your soul away? The question he asked was, what would you give to get your soul back? Fundamental techniques in handling souls. 6 ways not to make people like you, but to gain favor. And then we'll close by looking at how to win people to change their way of thinking. It's not about trying to get people to think like me, but it's about helping us all get to where we're thinking like Christ. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, Philippians 2:5. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, Romans 12:2. We want to have the mind of God. We want to think the way God would have us to think. So we begin in the wisdom of winning souls by looking at fundamental techniques of handling souls. 3 primary ideas here. Never criticize, condemn, or complain. That was Mr. Carnegie's statement. He began with the proverbial, if you want to gather honey, don't kick over the beehive. If you've ever tried to gather honey, you know that stirring up the bees is, well, roughly equivalent to stirring up a hornet's nest. And it's never a good idea. If you want to gather honey, don't kick over the beehive. If you want to make progress, don't start in the negative case and the kickative mood. People always see themselves as right, morning, noon, and night. People always see themselves as having the best of intentions. In the early 1900s in New York, the early morning of a spring day was shattered by the sounds of gunfire as Two-Gun Crowley was holed up inside his girlfriend's apartment fending off the police. Just days earlier, he and his girlfriend had been in a parked car in a private place when a policeman knocked on the window, and Mr. Crowley had fired 6 rounds into the officer and then exited the car, took the officer's service rifle and fired 2 more into his prostrate form. In the manhunt that ensued, Mr. Crowley ended up in his girlfriend's apartment with the rat-a-tat-tat of machine guns firing from rooftops into the domicile. He was ultimately arrested. Never admitted to wrong. In fact, on the day that he was arrested, he said, under my coat beats a weary heart but a kind one that would do no one any harm. Now, this is the same man that had cold-bloodedly killed a police officer just days before. And when he was sentenced to the electric chair, his words were not, this is what I get for killing a law enforcement official. His words were, this is what I get for defending myself. At no point would he admit wrong. But that shouldn't come as a surprise. Al Capone, Chicago's public enemy number 1, the lead gangster of American history, so to speak. Al Capone saw himself as a public benefactor. He said, I've given the best of my days to give people the finer benefits. He saw himself as helping others. The same can be said for so many. In fact, Lewis Lawes, the former warden of Sing Sing, actually penned a book concerning his interaction with the prisoners in Sing Sing, and observed that none of them believed that they really deserved to be there. They all felt that they had to be quick on the trigger finger or slick with the wallet. Why? Because people never really think that they are wrong. Now, if that's true of Al Capone and of Two Gun Crowley and of the men and women behind bars at Sing Sing, what do you think about the people whose doors on which we'll be knocking come next Sunday? Do you think they automatically assume they're wrong as they come to the door to open and say hello? Or do you think they're people who assume that they are in the right, or at least all right? When we start with criticism, we start with futility. When we start with criticism, we put people on the defensive, and all they want to do is justify themselves. You can see it not just in dealing with crime. You can see it in dealing with the rules at work. For instance, there was one gentleman, George B. Johnson, who was a safety coordinator in Enid, Oklahoma, and he saw that many of the people of the engineering firm weren't wearing their hard hats as they were supposed to be wearing, and so he would make the point with them with great authority, "You're supposed to wear your hat." They would sullenly put the hats back on their heads until he walked away, then remove them. He started being kind about it. "Fellas, are those hats not comfortable? Do they not fit? You know, we have those for your protection. We don't want anyone being injured. If you don't mind wearing them, we'd feel a lot better about your safety." He found that there was greater reception and a lot less resentment. Why? Well, because he'd not started out negative. Now, what's this got to do with the book of Proverbs? We'll start with Proverbs 9, verse 7. "Rebuke not a scorner, lest he hate thee. Rebuke a wise man, he will love thee." What do we mean by that? You rebuke a scorner, someone that thinks he's right, that refuses to listen, all he's going to do is hate you. The wise will listen, but let's go ahead and face it. By and large, folks ain't wise. English teachers, you'll have to forgive me. By and large, we are all prone to thinking we're right far more often than we actually are. In fact, if you skip forward this time in Proverbs, look at chapter 20, picking up at verse 6. Another statement connected to the idea. Proverbs 20, verse 6, "Most men will proclaim every one his own goodness." In other words, just listen to them. They'll tell you how right they are. "Most men will proclaim every one his own goodness, but a faithful man who can find?" And then we compare the words of Proverbs 27, picking up at verse 5. "Open rebuke is better than secret love. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." Christians, we are to be the kind that if someone points out something wrong, we listen. We acknowledge, we observe, we study, we examine. And we are humble enough to be willing to say, "I might be wrong." Can you say those words? I might be wrong. The world does not have that capacity. The world is slow to listen to anything that would require change. Thus, when we begin by saying, "Hey, I'm going to show you you're wrong," we're already putting ourselves behind the 8 ball. But when we listen to the wisdom that Solomon gives, the counsel that he supplies, which, by the way, far predated Mr. Carnegie's observations, when we reprove a scorner, he's going to hate. The wise will listen. More often than not, the people we meet are going to be more prone to foolishness than wisdom. And if they're going to be led to wisdom, it's going to take patience. It's going to take a softer approach. Never criticize, condemn, or complain. Does that mean that we're tolerant and embracing of all errors? Not in the least. That means we recognize what's wrong. We try to lead people to what's right without going ahead and putting ourselves in 2 steps behind from the start. The next chapter in the first section of Mr. Carnegie's book was make the other person feel important. In fact, his little quip for the chapter was the big secret of dealing with people. The only way I can make you do anything is to make you want to do it. Now, there are different ways to make people want to do something. For instance, the thief may make you want to give him your wallet by pointing a firearm at you. But that's not going to be ready acceptance of the action, is it? No, when we're talking about helping people obey the gospel, we're trying to convince people to want to do it. In fact, if you think about what it takes to get people to want to do something, that means we're going to need to listen to who they are, what they like. Now, the deepest principle in human nature, according to William James of Harvard, the deepest principle in human nature is the feeling to be appreciated, or the desire to be important. Every person wants to feel important. Abe Lincoln once began a letter with those very words. We all like a compliment. We all like to feel important. Charles Schwab, who was the first person in America to make $1 million a year as someone else's employee, Charles Schwab observed that his ability to arouse enthusiasm was the greatest asset that he possessed. And the way that he did this was by appreciation and encouragement. He observed there's nothing else that so kills the ambitions of a person as criticisms from superiors. I never criticize anyone. I believe in giving a person incentive to work. I'm anxious to praise but loath to find fault. If I like anything, I am hearty in my approbation and lavish in my praise. In other words, he heaped up the commendation and tried to stay away from the condemnation when leading people to better performance. Now, that's in the workforce. But what about us when we're trying to gain influence with souls? Proverbs 3, verse 34. Surely he, God, scorneth the scorners, but he giveth grace unto the lowly. Indeed, because when I will behave myself in a lowly way, it's not only God's graciousness, but how do other people act when you behave lowly around them? How do other people respond to you when you go out of your way to lift them up? I told you I was preaching to the choir, because this group is adept at that very skill. It's such a privilege to be able to be around souls that are focused on encouraging and edifying and truly showing others how important they are. Brethren, it's vital that we do this for each other. It's also vital that we do this for the lost. Jesus would relate to this principle, Luke 14:11, when he said, whoever exalteth himself shall be humble, but he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. The more we humble ourselves in the presence of others, the more others want to be in our presence. Proverbs 28, this time verse 23, he that rebuketh a man afterward shall find more favor than he that flattereth with the tongue. We're not talking about flattery. Flattery is insincere praise. Flattery is telling the other person what he wants to hear. We're talking about making people feel genuinely important. And the only way to do that is to listen, which actually brings us to the next topic. We take a look at our next subject. Mr. Carnegie's quip was, he who can do this has the whole world at his fingertips, but he who cannot walks a lonely road. What's that trick? Arouse in other people an eager want. Now remember, the only way to make anyone do anything is to get that person to want to do it. How do we get people to want to do things? I enjoy fishing. There are others in here that enjoy it just as much. When I go fishing, I do not put Oreos on a hook. Now, I like some Oreos. Matter of fact, I like to take double stuffed Oreos, take them apart, and then have a quadruple stuffed Oreo from putting together the insides of two. That's good. Fish aren't as big on that. I like a Snickers bar, but it doesn't do a lot of good to put a Snickers bar on the hook and throw it into the water unless you're catching some trash fish. I'm not a fan of worms. And for the life of me, I don't want to know what a cricket tastes like. Not a live one. Yet when I go fishing, I have to bait the hook to suit the fish. You think that might be applicable to come ye after me and I will make you to be fishers of men? Do you think it might be important for us to learn how to bait the hook to suit the fish when we're fishing for souls? If we want to influence souls, we need to talk about what they want, help them see how to get it. And that involves learning what it is that is of interest to them. Of course, we have to be talking in spiritual terms. But the more we learn about the neighbor, or the more we learn about the coworker, the more we will hopefully hear references to spiritual areas where they have concerns or questions, confusions. And it's at that point that we can begin to ask the questions that can lead to, do you want to see what the Bible says about that? Ralph Waldo Emerson, considered one of the great intellectuals of his day, was out in the yard with his son trying to get a calf to go into the barn. Mr. Emerson pulled from the front, his son pushed from the back, but the calf was doing just what they were doing. It was only thinking about what he wanted. It didn't want to go into the barn, and so it fought back, and they weren't able to move it. But a maid came outside, saw what they were doing, walked up to the calf, put her thumb in its mouth, and with that paternal instinct of nursing, the calf followed her right into the barn. She never had to strain a muscle. How often do we stop and think about what the other entity wants, about how the other person is thinking and what the other person is thinking? Henry Ford observed, if there's any one secret of success, it lies in the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as your own. What does Solomon have to say about this? Well, take a look at Proverbs 28:16. Almost every time in the book of Proverbs you read the word understanding, we're talking about this idea, because the Hebrew word so often translated understanding is derived from the word bean. And no, I don't mean the one that can either be a pinto or lima. B-I-Y-N is how we would spell it in English. But the Hebrew word bean carries the idea of understanding another person's viewpoint, seeing things from multiple perspectives, putting aside my perspective and my wants, and trying to get into the other person's shoes and see things from behind the other person's eyes. Proverbs 28:16, the prince that wanteth understanding is also a great oppressor. In other words, if I try to lead without understanding the individual that I'm leading, all I'm doing is oppressing. All I'm doing is forcing my will. Christians, let's ask ourselves. Preachers, let's look in the mirror. How often have we tried to lead by oppression instead of understanding? How often have we just expected people to see our viewpoint, look at it my way, instead of stopping to connect with the souls and make the common ground so that we can advance to where the Lord would have us to be? Arousing the other person an eager want. If we're going to be fishers of men, then we have to bait the hook to suit the fish. And that means we need to learn the fish and learn what it is that appeals to them, that catches their attention, that gains their involvement. Fundamental techniques. Never start in the negative. Make the other person feel important and arouse an eager want. Now, 6 ways to gain favor. We're not talking about making people like us. We're talking about gaining favor so that we can, again, move forward. Mr. Carnegie said, do this and you'll be welcome everywhere. What's that trick, Mr. Carnegie? The title of the chapter was Be Genuinely Interested in Others. When you go to visit a friend, and that friend's dog comes out wagging the tail with the tongue just dangling, all happy and jumping, how do you feel about that dog's reaction to you? Does it make you want to pet the dog? I'm here to tell you, when I come into the office here and I get to see Chief or Sport, it's just a thrill. I think they like me. What if we as people would treat other people that way? What if we would be as genuinely happy to see people as the animals that so often cause us to smile? That's why dogs make such a hit, because they make people feel important with the way they behave. A dog has been called the world's greatest winner of friends. An observation: you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can make in 2 years by trying to get people to be interested in you. Let me say that again. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in other people than you will make in 2 years by trying to get people to be interested in you. We apply that to evangelism. And the more we show interest and concern and compassion for the people we're trying to reach, the more prone they are to listen to the gospel that we're endeavoring to teach. But the more we just expect them to sit down and shut up and listen to whatever it is we want to pontificate, the less likely we are to get anywhere. The New York Telephone Company did a survey years ago on the most commonly used word. Do you want to know what it was? The pronoun I. Question: when you look at a group picture and you know that you're in that picture, whose face do you try to find first? I? Why is that? Because each of us is so prone to think about self. And that is a great handicap when we're trying to lead others. Mr. Alfred Adler observed, "It's the individual who's not interested in his fellow man that has the greatest difficulties in life and provides the greatest injury to others. It is from such individuals that all human failures spring." In other words, the person not interested in others is the one most likely to mess everything up. Howard Thurston, considered the dean of magicians, before he went on stage every night, told himself, "I love my audience. I love my audience. I love my audience." Next Sunday, before you walk up to a door and, "I love these souls. I love the Lord. They need the Lord. I love these souls." Are we genuinely interested in the people that we're endeavoring to reach? To make friends, let's put ourselves out to do things for others. To gain influence, let's do things that require time, energy, unselfishness, and thoughtfulness. If we want to make friends, let's greet people with enthusiasm. When you knock on the door and they open, "Hi, I'm Scott. I'm with the Forest Hill Church of Christ, and we're just trying to..." Yeah, that's going to fly like a lead balloon, isn't it? "Hi, my name's Scott, and we're Christians in the area, and we're just trying to get out and get to know some folks. Well, you've got such a lovely yard. What's your name, sir?" "Oh, it's good to meet you, Mr. Ted. Is there any way with which we can pray for you?" Show genuine interest. Not just a spiel or a routine, but genuine interest. Proverbs 18:24. "He that hath friends must show himself friendly." If we would gain influence and build relationships, then we have to show ourselves to be friendly. That also applies in evangelism. "But Scott, Jesus wasn't very friendly with the Pharisees." You're assuming that he went in being negative with them from the get-go when they were the ones that brought in the negativity. Jesus always started in as positive a manner as possible. He that hath friends must show himself friendly, do we? Do we show genuine interest in others? A simple way to make a good first impression, one word: smile. You walk into a room, and it's a room filled with faces that look like they've been sucking on lemons for 4 hours. And then there's one face that has a smile. Where are you going to go? Which person are you going to try to approach first? That smiling face? I'm here to tell you, if you want the preacher to look in your direction, be the person that smiles throughout the sermon. I can remember a congregation where we would visit frequently, and there was one lady that, I tell you what, I thought I was Garland Elkins every time I visited there, just from the look on her face. And I think I just stared like this the whole time preaching, because you see a smiling face and you gravitate toward it. Do we want people to gravitate toward us, especially when we're talking about trying to share the gospel? it might be the case that we need to work on our expressions. Charles Schwab said his smile had been worth $1 million, and he probably underestimated the fact. There was a gentleman named James McConnell, psychologist at the University of Michigan, who observed that people who smile tend to manage, teach, and sell more effectively. They tend to raise happier children. There's more information than a smile than a frown. Proverbs 15:13. There I go losing it. Proverbs 15:13. A merry heart maketh a cheerful countenance. Because that's one of the things that is reflected in a smile, is that heart's happy. And a happy heart can be contagious. A merry heart is catching. A merry heart maketh a cheerful countenance, but by sorrow of the heart the spirit is broken. Which are we conveying as we endeavor to share the message of Christ? Yes, 6 ways to gain favor. Be genuinely interested. Smile. If you don't do this, you're headed for trouble. That was Mr. Carnegie's quip. Remember that a person's name is the sweetest sound to that person in any language. Sid Levy was endeavoring to sell to a particular account, and he went to visit the owner, and everyone called him Nick, but he was a transplant from Greece. And Mr. Levy decided he wanted to learn this man's full name, and so when he greeted him that day, he said, "Good morning, Mr. Nicodemus Papadoulos." Mr. Nicodemus Papadoulos stopped, teared up. He said, "Mr. Levy, in all of my 15 years in this nation, that is the first time anyone has taken the effort to call me by my real name." Oh, there's power in a name. Don't believe it? Be the person that always forgets names. Yes, it takes effort to remember. But when we do, Jim Farley had been working since before he was a teenager. Had to do so because his father was killed when young Farley was a child. He worked his way through mechanical jobs in the Postal Service, became Postmaster General. Eventually, he was the campaign manager for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And Mr. Farley, over the years, had developed a practice of remembering names, and his habit for the campaign was to travel ahead, visit areas, meet people, jot down names, and within days of returning from that trip, send a card to every name that he had met with something personal about those individuals. It was said that he could remember 50,000 names of the people that he had met. And because of that influence, he gained a greater connection in those areas where he was trying to wield influence. Simply by remembering a name. To whom are you more likely to extend courtesy? The person that always says, "Hey, you," or the one that goes out of the way to remember your name? There's a lot of names in here, and thank you all for being so patient with this preacher. Remembering names. What Solomon had to say about that one? Proverbs 22:1. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. Solomon's talking about reputation, absolutely. But a reputation is always attached to a name. Nobody wants to be nobody. Every soul wants to be recognized for something positive based on connected to his identity. Remember the name, and you're a step ahead. An easy way to be a good conversationalist: just be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. What so often happens is this. You want to know how to make people shun you and laugh at you behind your back and even despise you? Here's the recipe. Here's how to do it. Never listen to anyone for long. Talk incessantly about yourself. If you have an idea while the other person is talking, don't wait for him or her to finish. Just bust right in and interrupt in the middle of the other person's statement. Because that goes over well, doesn't it? But how often do we find ourselves doing that? How often do we find ourselves cutting other people off mid-sentence because a thought actually traveled through my brain and I'm so unaccustomed to having one there, I just had to give it free rein. Just because I had a thought doesn't mean I have to share it immediately. Courtesy is a thought. Maybe it's one we should entertain more often for those of us that might struggle with interrupting and talking about I, me too much. Mr. Murray Butler, former president of Columbia University, observed that those people who only talk of themselves are hopelessly uneducated. They're not educated no matter how instructed they may be. When we are trying to connect with souls, it's not about me. It's about that person, and it's about that God. It's not about what I think. It's not about what I believe. It's about what that soul needs and what that God says. Just that simple. Easy way to become a good conversationalist, be a good listener. We have to listen to that other person before we're going to be able to connect and teach about what God has said. How do we interest people? We'll talk in terms of that person's interest. It is said that Theodore Roosevelt would sit up late at night before he would have a guest the next day and spend hours studying whatever subject of interest he knew was of special importance to his upcoming visitor, because he wanted to address what engaged that individual. Do we care enough to speak in terms of the other person's interest and to let the other person do the majority of the talking? Proverbs 3, this time picking up at verse 3, let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck. Write them upon the table of thine heart. Mercy, loving kindness. Loving kindness is about the other, not me. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Verse 4, so shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and men. Now connect that with the words of Proverbs 15, this time verse 28. There are those that always seem to have something to say no matter what the topic of conversation might be. Now what they say is not deep, but it sure is centered around what they know or the lack of their knowledge. Proverbs 15:28, the heart of the righteous studieth to answer. In other words, the heart of the righteous stops and thinks and gives contemplation and at times gives the study needed before engaging in a discussion. But the mouth of fools poureth out evil things. We want to connect with souls and lead them to the gospel of Christ. The impression that will be made if we just try to make up stuff, if we try to engage and show off what we know, is not the impression the Lord would have us to leave. But if we will indeed study to answer, and at times, even when there's a biblical question, say, I'm not sure about the answer to that. I need to look that up. I need to research that. Let's face it, there are times we're going to encounter some of our denominational friends and some of our friends of varying beliefs that they are going to ask questions that came out of left field from a ballpark 3 cities away. And it's going to be difficult to know just how to answer some of those questions. It's okay to say, will you give me a little bit of time to research that? In fact, that just prolongs the conversation and gives further opportunity for later study. How to interest people? We'll talk in terms of that other person's interest to the point that it's not about me, it's about that individual. And I'm humble enough to prolong the conversation. Make people like you instantly. This is what Mr. Carnegie said, by making others feel important. Scott, we've already talked about that, I know. But that's just how important making others feel important is. The unvarnished truth is that almost all the people you meet feel themselves superior to you in some way. And a sure way to their hearts is to let them realize that in some subtle way you recognize their superiority. You recognize that they're important and recognize it sincerely. Too often people are trying to compete to make themselves seem more important and exalted than the person standing closest, whomever that might be. You ever hear those wives that are all the time running down their husbands in the foyer whenever they're talking with the other ladies of the church? Or the husbands that are all the time running down their wives and turning the old lady into a punchline? You want to know why he's acting that way? Because he's selfish. You want to know why she's behaving that way? Because she's selfish. The only person important in the world is him to him, or her to her. And people do the same thing, not only with spouses, but with children, with their brethren. Let's make others feel important. Jesus put it this way: all things whatsoever you would men do unto you, do you even so unto them. This is the law and the prophets, Matthew 7:12. Do you like to be made to feel important? Do you, like me, enjoy a compliment about your hair and how well it's parted all the way down to the neck? Do you enjoy observations about things you've said or jobs you've done? So do other people. Find a way to give sincere praise and see what happens. Let the conversation be about qualities of the other individual. Proverbs 27, 1 and 2. Boast not thyself of tomorrow, thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. Let another man praise thee, not thine own self, a stranger, not thine own mouth. Christians, it is a sad truth that there are too many people that claim to be members of the Lord's church that have extended their arms to the point of orangutan length because they've been so busy patting themselves on the back, throwing their shoulders out of socket, instead of looking for reasons to edify and encourage others. No, we don't do what we do in order to exalt ourselves. This is not the Babel Church of Christ. We're the Lord's church, and we're endeavoring to bring others to the Lord with a proper mindset and mentality. Fundamental techniques in dealing with souls. 6 ways to gain people's favor, and now, very quickly, how to win people to change their way of thinking. Fact: you cannot win an argument. Because if you win it, you lose it, and if you lose it, you lose it. 9 times out of 10, an argument will end with each person more firmly convinced that he is absolutely right. Oh, is there a place for argumentation and debate? Absolutely. But more often than not, it's not at the doorstep of the person whose house we've just visited. And more often than not, it's not in the break room. Those break room brawls, or those water cooler wailings where we think we're going to debate. No, all that's being done is each is trying to show how much he knows, and what's really being done is each is showing how unwise he is. You can't win an argument. What Solomon had to say about this one? Proverbs 15:18. A wrathful man stirreth up strife. By the way, if we think it's evangelism just to go out and get under people's skin and make them mad, we might just have the wrong idea. Yes, there are those that are going to get upset no matter what, and that is not to be attributed to the fault of the Christian. But let's face it, brethren, there are some that claim to be preachers and claim to be teachers that they thrive on agitating. No, it's a wrathful man that stirreth up strife. He that's slow to anger appeases strife. Compare that with Proverbs 17:14. The beginning of strife is as when one letteth out water. When water starts to flow, it's hard to stop it. When you get a leak in the house, good luck sealing it. When a levee breaks, has anyone ever heard of New Orleans and Katrina? The beginning of strife is as when one letteth out water. Therefore, leave off contention before it be meddled with, because strife is the same way. Once it starts, it will not stop. Proverbs 18:19. A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city. And when we begin with contention, he that winneth souls is wise, but a brother offended is harder to be won. Is it wise to make it harder to win a soul? I'll let you answer that question for yourself. You can't win an argument. Next truth: show respect to the other person's opinions. Never just come out and say, "Oh, you're wrong." Oh, I know, that can be hard. For me, it's not so much about just coming out and saying, "Are you stupid or something?" No, but so often our faces look that way. No. We need to get control of our expressions too. Yes, there are times when people say things that it's hard to gauge just where that comment might have originated. But whenever we convey the idea of, well, you're just wrong, all we're doing is attacking their intelligence, their judgment, their pride, their self-esteem. And are they going to be prone to listen? If I walk up to you and begin a conversation about, hi, my name's Scott, and I know you're wrong about half the things you do. You want to talk about it? How well is that going to go? Never begin with, I'm going to prove so-and-so to you. That's bad. Maybe a better approach would be, you know what, I might be wrong, and I frequently am, but I've thought otherwise on this topic. I tell you what, I've been wrong so often. What if we just sat down and considered the facts and just looked at things? If I'm willing to admit that I might be wrong, guess what that causes the other person to do? Well, I might be too. Let's look at it. Let's think about this. Proverbs 15, 1 and 2, a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. The tongue of the wise useth knowledge aright. The mouth of fools poureth out foolishness. Am I using knowledge the right way, or am I just pouring out everything that I think I know? Another relevant verse, Proverbs 15, 23, a man hath joy by the answer of his mouth, and a word spoken in due season, how good it is. Are we speaking words in due season? Will we think about what we're saying and adopt the proper attitude from the start? Proverbs 16, 24, pleasant words are as a honeycomb, sweet to the soul, health to the bones. Paul would say, let your words be seasoned with salt. Indeed, that's what we're trying to do, is season and sweeten our words to make them as receptive as possible. If you're wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. Be willing to say you're wrong if you are wrong. Don't walk up to the other person and say, hey, you know you're wrong. But if you make a mistake, admit it. And do it quickly. Do it emphatically. Any fool can try to defend his mistakes, and most do. But it makes you more noble, more respectable to be willing to say, you know, I messed up over there. Proverbs 16, beginning in verse 18, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. And if I'm too proud to admit when I've said or done something wrong and I'm trying to win a soul, guess what that does to my influence with that soul? Begin in a friendly way. Again, Proverbs 15:1, a soft answer turns away wrath. Proverbs 18:24, he that hath friends must show himself friendly. Begin friendly. Start with the right step. Two more ideas. First, to get the other person positive from the get-go. Jesus would say, agree with thine adversary quickly while thou art in the way, Matthew 5:25, referring to contention between children of God. Agree with your adversary quickly. That means find common ground and then move forward. Can we do that with those we're trying to reach? Agree with them quickly. Find common ground. Proverbs 16:17, the highway of the upright is to depart from evil, but he that keepeth his way preserveth his soul. We're not looking for evil and strife and hardship. We're controlling our tongues and our thoughts. Proverbs 25, this time verse 21. If thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat. If he be thirsty, give him water to drink. Instead of making enemies, we can make friends. And in making friends, maybe we can make Christians. And then let the other person do most of the talking. Proverbs 1:5. A wise man will hear and increase learning. A man of understanding will attain to wise counsels. And think about that. A wise man is not a know-it-all. A wise man will hear and will learn more. The wisest way to deal with other people is not to try to act like you're the wisest person in the room. The wisest way to deal with other people is to make sure that they are contributing to the conversation, that their thoughts are being conveyed. Yes, their statements might be wrong, but you're learning about the individual, and you're learning about things that can be used in influencing this soul. No, we're not talking about endorsing error, no way, shape, form, or fashion. We're talking about connecting with souls in hopes that they'll listen to the gospel of Christ. There's a practical way to approach the ones that we're trying to reach. And we don't have to go to any secular book to find it. Although there might be great advice in the power of positive thinking, or there might be good advice in how to win friends and influence people, we can find the information we need in the book of Solomon, Proverbs, how to win souls and influence hearts. Now, it might be the case this evening that you've been a person that has been unwilling to listen to the gospel because of the way someone else may have tried to approach you in years past. Or maybe you yourself have been in that negative case and kickative mood. Your soul's worth saving. Your soul's worth the world. But only you can make the decision to become a Christian, to obey the gospel of Christ. As we've discussed earlier this morning, hearing that message of his death, resurrection, and witnesses. Confessing, believing it to the point of confessing Christ as Savior, repenting of sins, being baptized in his name, Acts 2:38. This afternoon, maybe you've obeyed the gospel, but you've turned away from following God. Maybe as you think about this interaction with people, you realize how far from wisdom your behavior has been. You're not the first. You won't be the last. But it can be the last day of such behavior for you if you're willing to repent. This afternoon, if it's time to come home, if it's time to be made right with God, why not take the opportunity while we stand together, while we sing the song that's been selected?